Okay. When given a curriculum for the school year, how much choice do you have as an individual educator to determine what books students will read?
Very little. The school district itself has a certain amount of novels, and they supply the novels to begin with, and the curriculum itself is built like 10th grade English is set to have American history novels and stuff like that. So you have to work with some specific pieces. There is a little slight bit of option, but usually the option is the school still has the books, but you get to pick between one book versus another book. But typically we have to pick what books are available with the school, since every student has to have the option to receive a book for free. So they use the book room to check with their ID, check out a book that they're reading for their class, and if you pick a book that you just think is more modern, more up to date, maybe a little bit more beneficial, but not every student can read it because you don't have enough books in the school, then you can't mandatorily assign that book, and you'd have to even look into the options of, is it possible to make this as an alternative option, but others are reading a different book.
Okay. If you could change any way that the curriculum is set up, what would you add or what would you take out?
I would just try to do anything to make it a little bit more current and more modern. It's good to pay attention to the classics, but it's also good to touch on both. So the fact that there are so many books that are a little bit older and have been around for quite some time, and students don't get to see what's being done now unless they choose to do it on their own, then having a lack of modern books or books that are written within the last decade even would be beneficial for some.
Okay. Students learn differently depending on teachers' style and also their own learning style. Teachers will use sometimes visuals, multimodal, hands-on. From your own experience, what is probably the most effective teaching style in a sense that you can achieve the best results overall from your students?
Well, as far as the most effective goes with English, I would say any type of style where you're dealing with words and putting their knowledge into writing, because we have to build on their writing abilities and stuff like that. So when you force students through any type of assignments to do an activity and then put it into writing, it does help build that skill. But as far as like an activity goes to like help them understand a concept a little bit better, like you said, there are so many different learners, so one activity will help a certain type of student versus another, and I think the most important thing is that you have a connection with your activity to them. So whether it's an activity where you get up and are very mobile and you're helping your students who are more bodily kinesthetic and they need to move around to learn a little bit more, you do that from time to time and you don't just abandon it or you don't overdo it, because if you do one or the other, you might alienate a different type of learner who feels like your instruction is all the same way and you never do anything different. You always have the same projects, you always have the same this. So I think the biggest key is to make a connection to them, but activity-wise, anything that does bring them out of the normal and gets them to move around, stand around, I think does help a little bit.
So more interactive learning. Okay. Do you use different forms of multimodal teaching personally? If so, like how do you use this style in your daily lectures?
I try to blend it in. I don't try to overdo it where it's overkill, because essentially in a writing class, which a lot of what I teach is writing classes, you are at one point or another going to have to sit down and write. But if you make a lot of the class so much sitting and writing, you are going to lose your audience and you are going to make it difficult. So what I try to do is mix different things in. Like I have a unit where we talk about the different types of literary criticisms, and I bring in movie critiques and movie criticisms into the topics and stuff like that.
Do you show a lot of videos in your classes?
Some, not a lot. I'd just say blend it in here and there, but maybe like once a marking period, if that. But sometimes I show little clips, which I wouldn't consider videos, but like I'll show them a commercial to talk about the types of analysis that we'll be doing for the day, or I'll show them a video clip from Saturday Night Live to hook them or things like that. So movie-wise, more like once a quarter, if that, and then clip-wise, it's really short and blended in. So.
How do you see visual style teaching improve a student's education?
Some students don't get interested until they see the visual because that's their way of learning. So if they do not learn as much they just see a book and they shut down because they don't like reading as much. But when they see something that helps them see the actual things happening on a movie, in TV shows and stuff like that, then all of a sudden you'd see someone who might not have been paying attention at first all of a sudden start looking up and seeming like they understand what's going on a little bit more. So it does help. Would
you say, if you were to give me just a percentage out of your head, what would be the percentage of students that are more visual learners?
I would probably say, because visual learning includes even seeing text, let alone seeing images and stuff like that, I would say probably because of that basis, I would say maybe 75%.
Okay. When students are assigned a regular textbook to read, how many students of the class of, say, 30 are interested in what they're reading?
It varies. If you made me pick a number, I would probably say about half, like 15 if you were going to say that. Okay. But it really does vary. Some books really connect with them. Some students find it really interesting because they heard someone else say that it was a really good book. Some of them really just like reading or don't like reading. So you'll hit and miss here and there. So half's what I'd say in general.
So what are some ways that you can motivate, that you think is a good way to motivate students to read?
I really stand by like the connections and letting them have their own tie-ins to what they're doing, because if it doesn't connect to them, they don't see how it means anything or how it relates. So whether you do a project where they have to think about certain things that in their life or real life, and you tie it into this is what's actually happening or how it impacts you in one way or another, I think that's pretty important, because that way they personalize the assignment.
Okay. Given the option to not include only text-based literature, how would you feel about incorporating, for example, a graphic novel into your curriculum?
I think it could be useful. I really think that in benefiting the student, you've got to do a little bit of both. So if you were going to use a graphic novel, I wouldn't just use the graphic novel, or I would use it as a supplement, because in hindsight, they move on in life. They're going to have to, at some point, read certain things, whether it's an actual book because they're in an English class, or whether it's you have to look through a textbook because it's not an English class, but you still have to read what the content of the book says, or other things. There will be things in life that they will have to do at some point or another. But in general, graphic novels are another thing that there's a market for it, and people put that stuff together. So completely neglecting it is not fair either, because you have to give them that medium. Helps the learners some way. Some of them see it as a future career that they might be interested in. So it's good to do it, but to just assume that we are going to do nothing but graphic novels does alienate the other stuff that's really important that you get in your education. So
sure.
Supplements or another thing to have, like another unit we're going to look at as graphic novels, would be useful.
Yeah, like kind of like something to go along. Like still have the same literature that the curriculum has, but just incorporate graphic novels.
Correct.
So do you think that would excite students more about their English classes if they found they had to read maybe like a comic book?
From stuff I've done in the past, things that I've done, and you might remember this, where certain things that you do in lessons, I'd make it an assignment where you could do storyboard drawing and you draw pictures of what you got out of it or connected to you. And when they see a graphic novel, some of the art students who really love doing those assignments that I do from time to time really latch onto it, because they see the application of what their interest is into storytelling. But other students really are like, well, I could do a stick figures, and now that you're showing me a graphic novel, maybe I'd understand it a little bit better because of the visual, and I am a visual learner. But other people might just be like, well, I prefer books better, but that's how learning is. It's different people take a different method a little bit easier than others.
Okay. Do you feel like the images in a graphic novel helps, say you're reading a history book, do you think the images will help the students depict what's going on in history a lot better than if it was just text-based?
It does in ways that, especially if they lack vocabulary, some of them will see a word that says like something is happening at this point in history, but they don't understand what the word is, and they may not even take the time to look up the word. But when they see the actual action happening, even things that you don't get, especially when you mention history, that people's facial expressions, where you see that they're angry, sad, very moody about something, can tell a little bit about the story that maybe an author wouldn't even put into it, and you're just supposed to infer that he was angry, sad, all that stuff. But through a picture you could see those emotions, and they might understand even more than they would understand otherwise.
So you would consider graphic novels as an important form of literature, not to take over, but to incorporate as well?
Correct. I would say my overall feeling to it would be that I think it's useful, it's important to have it out there for students to see, some to help them learn a little bit better, and even for others to consider as a career choice medium of storytelling and things of that nature. But I think it does need to be the mix. So I would say overall that would be my opinion, that you've got to do a little bit both, and to just leave out graphic novels would narrow the minds of the students towards what's out there in the real world, and also a little bit of take away from some learning styles that students have that they just never got to see.
Okay. That's it for my question.